In this video, we will explore conditional statements in Perl. So, what is a conditional statement? A conditional statement is a block of code that will be executed if one or more expressions at the beginning of the conditional block evaluates true. Furthermore, conditional statements can be extended with additional cases to execute different logic based on given expressions. This all might sound confusing, but don't worry. Let's look at some basic examples to make it easier to understand. We already explored one of the conditional statements in our previous lectures, and that conditional statement is called ternary statement. This is where you give expression followed by a question mark and a block of logic you want to execute if the expression is true. Otherwise, followed by colon, block of logic you want to execute if it's false. Just to repeat it again with the example, we could say, aka print to our console, if 2 is larger than 1, then we want to print out hello. Otherwise, we want to print out world. If we save this, run our code, oops, we need a semicolon at the end, save this, run our code again, we're going to see hello printed in our console. This is because 2 is larger than 1 and we printed out hello. Now we could execute the opposite case if we would reverse this conditional check, which would evaluate to false. For example, we could say is 1 larger than 1, run our code with perlscript.pl, and we're going to see world printed out to our console. This is because 1 is not larger than 1, 1 is equal to 1. Now this is a basic example. What if we wanted to execute more logic, not just printing out a single string? Well, we could use a conditional statement by saying if or logic bracket, where we have to provide expression that evaluates to true, followed by opening and curly braces. And let's add some code there. Let's say I want to print out hello, and I also want to print out world. Now let's add an expression in our if statement and say if 2 is larger than 1, save the file, run the code, perlscript.pl, we're going to see two things printed out. We could also do more expressions, such as we could define a variable saying my var equals 1, and then we could print it out by saying my var, then interpolate that variable into a string, save it, run the code again. We're going to see hello, world, and my var, which holds a value of 1. You can add a lot of logic and other expressions in the if block that needs to be executed if the condition beginning at the if block evaluates to true. Now what happens, for example, if I say if 1 is larger than 1? Let's save this, run our code. We're going to see nothing printed to our console. This is because 1 is not larger than 1, so this block of code does not execute. We're not seeing anything in the console. In cases where our expression didn't evaluate to true, we could use another keyword called else, followed by opening and curly brackets, and then we could print something like this is else part. Add semicolon, save this, rerun our script. We're going to see this is else part printed in our console. We could actually extend this conditional statement even further. For example, I could say if my variable, which is test, equals 1, and then I could compare if test is larger than 1 and use a keyword, which is else if, written with ELS, if, so you don't write the full else word. Followed again by opening and closing brackets. And let's say if test equals 1 with two equal signs, and add curly brackets. And then we could say something like middle part. Save our code, go to the console, run the script, and we're going to see middle printed out in our terminal. You can add as many as else if blocks as you want. However, do note that if you have else blocks that meet two different conditions that evaluate to true, let's say I have first else if that evaluates to true and a second else if, but if I wanted to print out middle 2, go to the console, run the script, it's just going to print the middle part. So the key point to remember here is that these blocks of code execute in sequential order, and once a truthy condition is met, the execution of your code stops. So this first part did not evaluate to true, but the second part did. Since it evaluated to true, the rest of the code did not run. Now another keyword you could use is unless. And unless works exactly like if, but opposite. So meaning if your condition evaluates to false, then your code is going to be run. For example, if I type unless, opening and closing parentheses, say if test is larger than 2, say this is a negative case, save this, run our script again. And the same as with if blocks, you could extend it further with else if and put your conditions here and end it with else. However, do note that unless can be quite tricky to understand, especially if you want to add multiple conditions. From my experience, you really need to stop and think what this keyword is actually meaning, because it basically says if not true, and if you have many conditions in that unless block, it's just going to get very, very confusing. However, do note that you can use unless in conditional assignments, which becomes extremely useful and much more easier to read than saying if not condition. Let's see what I mean by that. For example, if I want to print out this test variable by saying var test, and let's say I wanted to change the test value to 2 if 2 is larger than 1. If we run this, we're going to see var equals 2 printed to our console, because we define a variable with a value of 1, and then we assign value 2 if this expression is true. We could also say assign a value of 2 unless 3 is larger than 2. If we save this, run the code, we're going to see var equals 1. This is because we're saying our variable equals to 1, and then we're saying assign value of 2 to our variable unless 3 is larger than 2. Well, 3 is not larger than 2, and that means 2 is never assigned to this variable. And this is one of my favorite features in Perl, because you don't need to use ternary expressions to reassign values. If you come from different programming languages, you might know that you have to use ternary expressions such as test equals 2, and then you need to provide a condition such as 3 is larger than 2. If yes, then value equals 2, otherwise value equals 1. If we print this, then we see that the value of 2 was assigned because 3 is larger than 2. In Perl, you can say test equals 3 if 2 is larger than 1. We print this out again. Here we go. Test now holds a value of 3. This is it for this video. Hopefully the conditional statements and using conditional statements in assignment context are much clearer now and you feel more comfortable using them in practice. I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you at the next one.